we had a little library in our home, and we still have it. A lot of books in it and so forth. It's very, very small. But World War I remember sitting down by the back, way back in the living room and looking over these cool pictures and everything of World War I. The tanks, planes, and all these things, you know. And I said, well, you know, it's nice we're not into a situation like that in our country. And of course, we all know what happened, right? Eventually. But I remember at our farm, I'm a farm boy, and my dad had a good-sized farm, and he just had cattle, had everything everybody would have on a farm normally. And but I remember during that time, there's quite a thing about airships and planes and so forth, and of course they were sort of in, I shouldn't say in their infancy, but they were there. And I remember looking out over one day, and this very, very quiet, huge piece of ship came over the house. And it was either the Akron or the Shenandoah. I can't remember which one it was. And but very, very low. You know, that was really impressive to a kid of 8 years old. You know? And I remember another time, this huge armada of Italian planes coming over the over Lake Ontario. They were on their way to the Chicago exhibition. Huh. And that was a while back. See, none of you were alive then. I gotta be careful with whoever you are. Anyway, things like that, you know, seeing all those things at 8 years old really made an impression on me. And they would hit each other. At the same time, I was also making model airplanes. And some I put together, you know, and they worked somewhat, but I always had the idea that they could be much better, so I never finished the plans. I made something else out of the model airplanes. And some of them crashed, some didn't work very well. And then about that time, as time went on, of course, we're getting up into an older age here, and new interests and so forth. My dad had a place called the Pump House on the farm where he fixed implements. And that was a great place for me because I learned how to use tools, and it was a good place, even though I ruined some of my dad's tools, but you know, he was very good about it. You know, just go ahead and he showed me. I don't know what he said to my mother afterwards, but another thing about my dad is that I stayed around home pretty much, and working with tools and so forth. But finally he said, hey, you know, you really got to get out of here and do something different. And go see the world. My dad was in Kansas for a while, and he loved his work out there, and farming and so forth. But he felt I was at home too much. Anyway, he said, you should get out and see some things. And he said, why don't you get on the bus and go, say, to Rochester at least. And, well, the other story, part of that is I love watches and so forth. It's being mechanical. I'll never forget, I bought a watch. I saved my money from a paper route. And I went down to a place called Front Street in Rochester. I don't know if anybody knows about that. That didn't have a very good feeling to it. It was kind of one of these places that you got to watch yourself. Front Street may have been all right, but the shops were not. And I saved up $11 and bought myself a watch. And well, I think about a year later, it didn't run anymore. So my day was right. I learned a big lesson from that. But anyway. Then, as time went on, jumping here a little bit, I was a paper boy, delivered papers for, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years. And then time came to the war. And of course, we knew the war was probably coming, and we didn't know the intensity of it. And that's all you got to do is see the news today and so forth, and you see in World War II, I'm talking about, things begin to happen. And especially along the East Coast, submarines, Nazi submarines. And that was very, very good. But we didn't know the intensity of it. We didn't know until organization like the Civil Air Patrol was beginning to leave information in the newspapers, and I used to read this as I'm riding my bike around, you know, and I said, boy, that sounds interesting. And but it also added to my feeling for aeronautics. And so as time went on, somebody suggested that you might want to join the Civil Air Patrol. Well, I didn't know anything about it. So, well, this is only the second year, you understand, the Civil Air Patrol. It was very, very new. So I went down and I checked it out, and yes, that's what I want to do. I think I have something good coming up here. So and the other side of it is that the war was beginning to intensify, and I know they're going to get me. We get all our class and so forth, the boys in the classes. So I enlisted, and at the same about that time, and so I really only got about a year and a half or so into the patrol, but I learned an awful lot. It was a wonderful ground for me to get started on what's coming up. It didn't fly, but we learned an awful lot of material, and that was tremendous. So as time went on, and then I finally, I'm going to make it short, I was called up and as an enlistee and joined the Army Air Corps, because I wanted to fly. Well, from that time on, things moved very fast because they really needed people as a source in the Army, especially the pilots and so forth. So I was eventually called up, and I went through my test at Biloxi, Mississippi, many tests, and they accepted me. Well, what happens after that? Well, I had to go for training, and I went to, as mentioned, I went to Tuskegee in Alabama. It was called an institute at that time, but that's where I took my pre-flight courses. Very, very good. Still, incidentally, that school is now a university, a full-fledged university. And anyway, from there, I went from there to the test, as I say, test and so forth. I went to primary, and primary is where you actually start flying, and I did. Not combat flying, just training. And which was very, very rigorous, and it was okay, it was good. Before that, you know, I knew about about schools and flights and so forth. I did probably a kind of foolish thing before I left it, because I wonder what it's like, because I know I had to wear a parachute when you're flying. And so my dad had chicken coop, and really had a really high roof, and I had the umbrella. I wonder what happens if you just happen to draw off it. And I did it. But maybe that's what's wrong with my life. But anyway, it was quite an experience. Because I don't understand why it went like this. Well, also, that was my first flight. And but anyway, the training was wonderful, and what I had at Tuskegee. But it came a time when the war was ending in Europe, and they didn't have enough pilots Tuskegee, or in the war. So they sent the pilots that were left over, a lot of them, to the Pacific War. And that's where I ended up. I wasn't a pilot there, but I was still in the Air Corps. And so all this training and everything I did was, down to that point was, it paid off for me. Learning how to use tools, and just getting to know people. It was a terrible time also for discrimination. I hate to bring this up, but I learned an awful lot about that because I've never been subjected to segregation like that. So I learned a lot from it, and people are people. And it's one of these things that I know there's some very nasty things going on in different places, but I went with it after it was okay. And I think that's probably enough to say. Everybody, thank you.